So welcome everyone. We're really excited to have you here today to join our masterclass, Digital Campaigning in the Age of Privacy, the Miracle Formula. Firstly, we'll start with some intros. So I'm Ben, I'm the head of digital marketing here at Pull, and I work with our clients to develop and execute all manner of digital activity from PPC and paid social through to influencer and organic social marketing. Next to me is Liv.
Hi, I'm Liv Povey. I'm the Senior Social Media Executive here at Pull. I work alongside Ben in the digital marketing team, helping health and beauty brands to coordinate their social media platforms through organic, paid and influencer activity.
Brilliant. I'm just going to cover off some quick housekeeping bits and pieces. We've already established that the chat is switched off, so sorry about that. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box throughout today's session. We should have time at the end to go through some of your questions, and we'll try and get through as many of those as possible. Of course, if you'd rather chat to myself, Liv, or anyone else here at Pull on more of a one-to-one basis, we'd love to get a meeting booked in with you. You can drop us an email on info@thepullagency.com and we'll share that at the end as well. Now, if my attendee list was correct, we've got some familiar faces on the call who we've worked with before, but also a lot of new faces as well. So before we get into everything, I want to quickly introduce who Pull are and what we do. Rather than putting together a bunch of slides, what we've got is a relatively quick video to show you what we're all about. So I'm going to hit play on that. Hopefully the sound works, and this should give you an idea of who we are and what we do. Brilliant. So hopefully with that video, what came across is, we're all about insight-driven storytelling for ambitious health and beauty brands. We believe inside every brand, there's a better story waiting to be told, and we relish kind of bringing that to life and telling it in a way that brings the biggest impact to your business, taking a strategic approach to campaign planning and bringing innovative thinking and creativity to the execution, making sure you're seen and heard in the places that matter most. But more specifically, today, we're here to speak to you about digital campaigning, performance marketing, direct response advertising, whatever you call it. So in terms of our experience here, we've got more than 10 years experience working across digital campaigns, activating and amplifying brand stories. All of the digital team here at Pull are Google Ads and Meta Blueprint certified. And Pull were among the first UK agencies to advertise on TikTok. We work across Pinterest, Snapchat, Twitter, LinkedIn, kind of any digital platform you can imagine. We've run campaigns on there. And so we bring kind of a huge amount of experience to make sure we're maximizing your campaign budgets and driving results. But that's enough intros and kind of who we are and what we do. I'm going to pass over to Liv now, who's going to talk you through kind of why you're here today, I guess, and what's changed.
Thanks, Ben. Now, if you've joined us here today, the chances are that you've experienced some kind of drop or change in performance and results from your campaigns. Well, despite the miracle formula tagline for this event today, we do have to be clear about one thing. The times have changed and the digital campaigning landscape does look pretty different to where it was, say, 18 months ago, for example. Things are undoubtedly tougher, but how did we arrive at this point? You might think it was the iOS 14 update, or maybe just a hangover from COVID, but there are a lot of other factors that led us up to this. So let's just rewind. So 2018, this is when GDPR hits. The General Data Protection Regulation came into effect in May 2018, tightening up the rules that govern how brands collect, process, store, and use people's data. The threshold for consent for some users was raised, while it also broadened a user's right to access or transfer their own data. But for brands and businesses, this meant their data sets shrunk. It reduced the size of their current opted-in audience, while also made it harder to gather new data. The effect that this then had on advertising was smaller pools of people to target and also less robust sources to use as the basis of lookalikes. And so results ultimately took a hit. So 2018 gave us some challenges, but there was one more to come. Now, does anyone know who this guy is? Well, for those of you who don't know, his name is Christopher Wylie, and he was the whistleblower whose information led to the Cambridge Analytica scandal. This then led to Mark Zuckerberg having to testify in front of Congress. But what was the actual scandal? Basically, personal data belonging to millions of Facebook users was collected without their consent by British consulting firm Cambridge Analytica, predominantly to be used for political advertising. Now, as fun as it was to watch Mark under pressure, the scandal actually brought with it some more bad news for advertisers. It put Facebook under the spotlight, specifically how it gathered users' data and how it then allowed advertisers to use that data. So Cambridge Analytica went bust, and Facebook was slapped with a huge $5 billion fine and forced to once again review the targeting options available to us as advertisers. The result was a huge slash of these options that brands had previously relied upon, with everything from insurance and mortgage data supplied by Facebook's data partners to certain job titles and other demographic information being completely stripped away from the platform. So once again, brands and advertisers had to rethink their targeting and reshape their audiences. They wanted to continue to see results. But then something else happened. COVID hit. So you would think almost 3 years on from the awful event, we wouldn't even need to mention that word anymore, but it is relevant here today. While the economic squeeze meant some brands reduced their spending, many businesses and digital advertisers saw a significant boost in the aftermath of COVID. With people stuck indoors, inevitably screen time went up. More screen time meant more impressions for advertisers, and more impressions meant more sales. So what's the problem, right? Well, the problem is it just didn't last. What brands saw in the aftermath was so-called COVID funny money. They were seeing good digital results and revenue, but this was partly due to the lingering effects of the pandemic, which continued to distort the picture. But this also didn't last. What we then saw at the back end of 2021 and into 2022 was a regression to the norm. The COVID funny money fell away, and brands found themselves needing to reset their expectations and targets. With performance dipping, this meant reassessing the effectiveness of their campaigns. And to anyone taking a more simplistic view, it simply looked like digital just wasn't delivering anymore. For example, if an ad campaign drops from a ROAS of 4 in 2021 to a ROAS of 1.4 in 2022, it's pretty easy enough to assume that digital just isn't working anymore. But of course, there was one more thing in 2021 that helped drive this shift. Yep, you guessed it. In 2021, Apple rolled out their infamous iOS 14 update with a greater focus on data protection and users' privacy. This restricted the data that was passed back from your website or app to the platforms. Now, if you have an iPhone yourself, you'll have seen this pop up at some point asking for your consent to be tracked. And let's be honest, apart from us marketers who understand the importance of good data, most people will opt out. And that's exactly what happened. It's reported that 94% of iOS users now opt out tracking, which is a huge amount of people. The update was launched in April of that year, and the impact really began to be felt in June. There was even a second wave of opt-outs at the end of that year and beginning of 2022, as some users who had perhaps previously put off updating their iOS systems received new phones and devices for Christmas, and with these new devices came the latest iOS by default. And needless to say, this had a pretty significant impact on campaign results, as it hindered not only the ability of brands and the platform's own algorithms to accurately target users, but it also restricted attempts to report and measure results as accurately before. So obviously this had a damaging effect on revenue. And as this chart from DigiDay shows, you can see in the months immediately before iOS 14, advertisers on Facebook would expect to see a ROAS of around 3.1. But after the update, this dropped to around 1.9, which is a huge 38% decrease. But it didn't stop there. Still getting to grips with the impact of the iOS update and what this meant for return on investment, we then hit 2022, and a whole load of other problems came along to impact consumer spending and wreak havoc with your campaigns. So first, we had the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the knock-on effects on the economy, meaning consumers were a lot more careful about where they were spending their money. Then we had the growing cost of living crisis, with consumers under financial pressures and strains that we just hadn't seen for a long time. And finally, this was rounded off with October's mini budget, which again hit everyone's spending power, both brands and consumers. So as you can see, in just a few years, quite a lot has happened. But now Ben's going to explain what you can do about this in order to get the best out of your campaigns.
Brilliant. Thank you, Liv. Yeah, so that, I guess, brings us up to speed with what's happened and probably why you're here today. Liv has painted something of a bleak picture about kind of the landscape and how we've arrived at this point. It's not all doom and gloom, and we've got some great case studies and reasons for optimism that we'll share later in today's session. But first of all, we're going to look at some of those tricks, tips, and tactics that you can deploy and you can use within your campaigns to make sure you're still maximizing results and you are seeing good health in your campaigns post kind of iOS 14, post COVID, you know, post cost of living crisis, whatever that factor might be. So generally, the actions you can take to minimize the impact of these changes can be divided into two categories. We've got stuff you can do on platform and things you can change and things you can affect there, but also some off-platform actions as well. The brands that see the best results are those that are successfully combining both elements. And we'll start by looking at on-platform. So again, there's a few things to consider here. Firstly, it's your audiences and user actions. So Liv has already spoken about kind of the impact on audiences that GDPR and the iOS 14 update has caused. So we'll dive into that in a second. Then you need to kind of shift your mindset on digital to think more full funnel, sorry. So we'll come on to that and explain kind of what you can do there. Also, there's now a whole bunch of automations and tools available across the different platforms that advertisers can use and take advantage of to drive better performance and drive better results. And then finally, we'll have a look at kind of more technical setup, just cover off a few bits and pieces there to make sure you're kind of ready and doing everything you can on your website and kind of on the platform to maximize results. So let's dive into that first one, kind of audiences. So as Liv said, the biggest implication of the iOS update has been on the audiences you use for your campaigns. In the before times, you could use all that great data to populate really effective lookalike and remarketing audiences, as well as platforms using that data to build out kind of effective interest targeting. That's what made paid social so great. They'd use that data not just from your website or your app with the tracking pixels and insight tags installed, but also from any other advertiser that had it installed as well. So what you had there was a really rich pool of data that you could use to build out your targeting and that the platforms could use to optimize your campaigns. For example, if user X converted on a particular ad, not only would they be fed into your retargeting audiences, the platforms would use the fact that they converted along with their attributes and habits and behaviors as a source for lookalike audiences, while also using browsing activity and other behaviors to determine who else to serve your ads to as well and optimize campaign delivery then. With the Apple update in 2021, the amount of data passed back has been greatly reduced. So while that scenario I've just described is still happening, it's the volume of data that they're getting has been greatly reduced, reducing the effectiveness of them. But there are actions you can take to combat the impact of this. Step one is just go broader with your audiences and go broader with your targeting. If the platforms are working with less data, then we need to do what we can to give them a helping hand. Firstly, revisit any interest-based audiences you might be using and see if there's any opportunity to expand on these. For example, if you're a natural skincare brand, you may have previously targeted users with an interest in natural skincare. However, following signal loss post iOS 14, platforms no longer have as clear a picture of who those users might be. So instead, you might try targeting simply skincare rather than natural skincare. It's a much larger cohort of people. In this example, it's about double the size. But what it actually does is give the platform a lot more data to begin with, a bit of a leg up and a head start. You might think that doing this is kind of losing a bit of what made paid social ads so great in the first place, that ability to be hyper-targeted and the variety of attributes and characteristics you could use to target. And you'd be right to an extent, but as Liv will touch on later, the platform's automation and AI tools do such a good job of optimizing campaigns now that actually we need to make sure we're just doing our bit in terms of pumping in enough data to give them a good start. And we're seeing a resurgence in the effectiveness of kind of interest-based audiences post iOS 14. When paid social advertising first took off, these were really, really effective. It was that ability to marry kind of regular demographic targeting like age, location, and gender with those behaviors and attributes. But over the years, those have been eroded away with things like GDPR, as Liv mentioned earlier, really reducing the amount of targeting criteria you could use. So they fell away and lookalikes became more effective. However, post iOS 14, we're seeing these interest-based audiences coming back to the fore. So now it is a really good time to revisit your customers, actually. Look at who your customer profile is, excuse me, revisit your personas, carry out some new research and focus groups if it's been a while since you did so. Figure out what their habits and behaviors are now, what are their interests, and how have these changed since COVID? Are there any fresh insights you could draw on to expand your audience? Like I say, it's about going broader and giving the platforms a little bit more info and data to work with. And we're not suggesting that you completely ignore your lookalike audiences either. These are still really effective. But as we've seen, with less data being pumped into the platforms, we need to do what we can to help. So it's simply a case of going broader with these as well. Now, on Facebook, on Meta, this could be as simple as moving the dial on your existing lookalike audiences by 1% or 2%. So if you were using a lookalike audience that was a 3% match based on website visitors in the past, expand this to a 4 or 5% match and see how that works. Increasing the scope here means that Facebook can expand its remit slightly to make up for any signal loss. And that's really a theme here. To maximize results, you really need to do whatever you can to improve the quality and volume of data that you're feeding the platforms, which leads us to our next point. Make sure you're optimizing for on-platform actions and on-platform objectives. If your data and signals from one source have been reduced, what do? You look for other sources. We know audience targeting is now hampered by data that's pushed back from websites and apps to the social platforms being restricted. But what if we ignore those? There are other sources we can look to for valuable data and signals. The most obvious of these are the platforms, Facebook and Instagram most specifically, themselves. So rather than creating lookalike or remarketing audiences based on kind of things you traditionally might have done, such as website visits or conversions, think about the actions people take on the platforms themselves. So typically, these will fall into one of 3 groups. Social engagement, so things like reactions, comments, shares, etc. on your posts or ads, video views, and lead forms. The idea here is that while the platforms know less about what users get up to on external sites and apps post iOS 14, they still know plenty about what your customers are doing on their own platforms and services. So this is still quality, rich data that we can leverage to improve campaign performance. Again, if you're a skincare brand and someone has saved your latest Instagram post featuring a new routine, a new hack, or a new product, it's fair to assume that person is a strong potential target for your brand and ads. So creating a remarketing audience based on social engagement with your brand can be incredibly effective. Likewise, video views are more lucrative than ever. If someone has watched 75% of your latest video, it's fair to say they're pretty engaged. So create a remarketing audience of these people. And this isn't necessarily new to a lot of you, but what iOS 14, and I am going to say iOS 14 a lot during this session, what iOS 14 has done is increase the importance of using these additional sources to create your audiences and shape your targeting. Of course, along with using them for remarketing, they also provide a better level of data with which to create new lookalike audiences from. Lead forms can be used in a similar way as well. So optimizing for people who've engaged, opened, completed a lead form in the past is a really effective way as well to collect more data. But this leads us on to our next point. These are all great sources to create new effective audiences for existing campaigns, but the really smart advertisers are also creating dedicated campaigns to drive these actions. So alongside your typical conversions campaign that you might run on paid social, set aside some budget to run dedicated campaigns designed to drive those actions we spoke about previously. So a dedicated video views campaign, a dedicated post engagement campaign, things like that, as well as acting as a bit of a proxy for brand awareness campaigns. These ensure you're consistently populating your lookalike and remarketing audiences with relevant users, quality data, and you'll get better results and cheaper results at the end of it. The next point I mentioned when we think of on-platform activity and what we can do there to boost results is just thinking more full funnel. There's always been this misconception, digital is just for conversions. This was never the case, and that's been brought into sharper focus since the Apple update, where it was previously seen as this direct response, conversion-focused channel. The brands that see the best results now have shifted to viewing paid social as a full funnel activity. Again, rather than just focusing on conversions, winning brands are running reach, traffic, and awareness driving paid campaigns as well. On one level, if you're running an awareness campaign, any engagement is going to help populate your remarketing and lookalike campaigns, as I've mentioned, but it goes deeper than this. Generally, only 5% of your audience are in market at any given time, and this drops to 1% during a recession. But rather than focus on that 5%, you should be doing whatever you can to ensure you're getting in front of the 95%, so that you're front of mind whenever they do find themselves in market. And brands that do this are seeing really effective, considerable uplift in results, both on platform and off. For example, adding reach campaigns to your activity increases sales. You can expect to see 18% more incremental sales when running reach and conversion campaigns compared to just conversion campaigns. So again, it's about shifting that mindset away from just conversions. Reaching more people more often means more sales. There's an 87% correlation between audience reached and the volume of incremental purchases. And lastly, more reach equals greater search volume. So brands running reach and conversion campaigns saw an 84% search uplift versus those just running conversions. So it's not just helping your digital campaigns on paid social, say, but all your other activity as well. I'm going to pass back to Liv now to have a look at some of the automation tools on the platforms and how you can use those to drive results.
Thanks, Ben. So the platforms actually do a really good job of learning and optimizing your ad delivery based on who it thinks is most likely to respond. But as it became even more important to rely on this in the wake of iOS 14, the platforms have continued to develop and evolve their automated features for us. In the past, these solutions appeared to help you get a bit more out of the platform, but really they just seem designed to get you to spend more money. But to be honest with you, post iOS 14, these really do help a lot. They drive a real improvement in results and can also help you save a lot of time. On Meta, these fall under its Advantage Plus suite of features and allows advertisers to optimize audiences, placements and creative, and budget. So why is this important? Because as we know, the signal loss experience post iOS 14 means we have less data available to us as advertisers. So by constraining ourselves with what we think we know, rather than letting the platforms just do their thing with what they know for certain, we're just going to be hindering campaign performance. So this leads me nicely onto our first feature known as Advantage Detailed Targeting. Now, deploying this option essentially signals to Meta that you're giving it permission to serve ads to users outside of your current targeting criteria, where the platform believes there is a high chance of the user taking your desired action. This is a really good option where you have a relatively small audience to begin with and would just like to scale it without opening things up too much. And also if you've got a remarketing campaign where the frequency is getting a bit too high. Many other platforms as well, such as LinkedIn, for example, offer their own version of this. So the second feature is known as Advantage Plus Creative, and the placement option here controls where your ads are displayed across Facebook and Instagram. Typically, this is on by default and means that your ads could potentially be shown across Meta's full suite of products, including Stories, Reels, Groups, and Messenger, for example. And again, it can be tempting to turn this off, but please do try to resist the urge because the platforms don't spend a lot on a certain placement unless you're guaranteed a result. Now, unlike placements, however, the creative automations are a little less straightforward. Selecting this option gives Facebook the green light to start playing with your creative where it thinks a user might be more likely to respond. For example, if someone responds better to images with call to actions on them, Facebook may add one from the ad copy that you've provided them. It also includes things like automatically adjusting the aspect ratio of your image or video, applying a template to your image to help it better fit a certain ad placement, or rearranging the headline and body copy that you've given them. For example, as you can see on screen here, it's taken our headline before and created some new body copy for Carmex. And it's also changed the story placement using the assets that we provided. So this is a really great option if you're lacking story assets. Now, while this can feel like a complete leap of faith, giving creative control to the platforms, doing so can reduce the overall cost of results. And lastly is budget. So with the Advantage campaign budget option selected, the platform will distribute your budget across multiple ad sets to deliver more results at an overall lower cost. While this can be effective, there will be times where you require a bit more control over how your budget is weighted. So we do suggest exercising a little bit more discretion with this option. For example, we know that older generations are more likely to click and engage on Facebook, but you might know that 25 to 34-year-olds are more likely to buy your product. So if you were running a traffic campaign with Advantage budget on, the platform would then divert more spend to the older group as it would get more clicks, but results would ultimately take a hit. Now, we appreciate that there is a lot of tech jargon here today, but if you do need any help with any of these automations or getting to know the features, we can help. But it's not just Meta that has been going big with these automated features. If you've been running any PPC activity on Google in the past year, the chances are you've at least encountered Performance Max. Performance Max campaigns incorporate Google Shopping, display, and search ads all into one campaign, automating the ad delivery to ensure that you're hitting your customer with the right ad at precisely the right moment. And so far, the majority of Performance Max campaigns have delivered superior results compared to regular shopping or display campaigns. In fact, Google even reports a 22% increase in conversions and a 20% reduction in overall cost per result. So these are really, really positive results, and it's no wonder that Google are phasing out shopping this year in favor of Performance Max. So what's the one thing to be mindful of with all these automations? Well, it's time. Because these campaigns thrive off the data that you feed them, they often need several weeks of activity for them to really start to deliver. So yes, you do need to be more patient, but you will see better results. So now that we've taken a look at some of the automated features that are available on the platforms, I'll pass back over to Ben to discuss the campaign technical setup and how you can do this correctly.
Brilliant. Thanks, Liv. So yeah, all the fancy automations and tools and adjustments to your audiences aren't going to help if you aren't doing everything you can with regards to your technical setup as well. And this starts with CAPI, aka Facebook's Conversions API. Now, in a perfect world, you'll all be sat there nodding along, having set Conversions API up back in 2020 when it first came out. but I know from bitter experience that some brands out there still haven't done this yet. So let's have a quick recap about what it is and why it's important. With the iOS 14 update limiting the info that tracking pixels can now ping back to the platforms, Meta, or Facebook, developed Conversions API to help fill in the blanks. It's deployed server-side rather than on your website, and it's designed to bypass browsers and send information straight to Facebook from your server. This means Facebook can have a clearer picture of the interactions a user has, and it can more accurately report on your ad campaigns. As cookies go away, internet privacy increases, and more users rely on the bane of our lives as advertisers, ad blockers. Server-side solutions like CAPI will become more important, and CAPI has probably been Facebook's most powerful weapon in its fight back against iOS 14. If you haven't installed it yet, you're operating with one hand tied behind your back. Facebook offers a bunch of third-party integrations for the likes of Shopify, WooCommerce, etc. And we can always help you set it up with any custom or unsupported CMS. But you really should set it up if you haven't already. Meta says that brands can expect to see a 13% improvement in the cost of results when using Conversions API. And in our own experience, the amount of results that go unreported is actually closer to 20%. So that's not just kind of data you're missing in terms of actually how well your campaigns have performed, but when we think back to how the platforms use that data and use it to optimize campaign delivery to other people or build out other audiences, that's 20% of really valuable data that you're not passing back to the platform. So it's really, really key that you get this set up. The other thing you'll need to make sure you've got set up correctly are the events or actions that you're tracking within Facebook. These are literally the activity that people take on your site. Pre-iOS 14, advertisers could create and track and therefore optimize for as many default or even custom events as they wanted. Now, only 8 manually selected events can be tracked. You can see these on screen now. They cover things like purchase, complete registration, add to cart, or add to wish list, for example. Most importantly of all, for users who have now opted out of tracking, advertisers only receive data for the top prioritized event. So these need to be configured in order of priority. Typically, we'd suggest arranging the events in line with how they occur in your sales funnel or purchase journey. So purchase being the top priority, right? But there can be occasions where you want to reorder this. For example, if you're on a drive to expand your customer database, you might want to prioritize lead. So now, part of your campaign planning process, whether that's internally or with your external agencies, should be, okay, what is the focus here? Which event is top priority? These can all be set up and accessed via Events Manager in the Meta Business Manager tool. And again, we can help with you to make sure they're all set up correctly. The next part of the session today, we're going to look at what you can do off-platform to kind of mitigate some of the factors that Liv mentioned right at the start, and also just drive performance and an improvement in results. So yeah, we covered off a heap of off-platform, but when it comes, on-platform, but when it comes to off-platform, there are 3 main areas to focus on. Number 1 is rethinking your expectations and what you measure, and I'll come on to that in a second. Number 2 is considering brand building versus activation. We spoke about this in the context of filling your funnel on platform, but we're going to dive into that off platform as well. And then lastly, our final off platform tip is to explore other platforms. And again, we'll come on to that shortly. So taking that first point then, rethinking your objective expectations and metrics. So this is really key because post iOS 14, with data taking a hit, kind of reporting and measurement taking a hit, it's easy to look at campaigns and think they're not working, but that's not the case. iOS 14, the update wasn't just rolled out, a switch was flicked and your campaign stopped working, stopped reaching the right people. That's not the case, but we do have to rethink what we're looking at, and kind of brands need to take a more holistic approach in terms of those metrics. So this doesn't just mean diversifying media spend, which we're going to come on to, but making sure your reporting has been adjusted for a broader set of goals and KPIs to get a better understanding of a customer's journey. So rather than focusing purely on how many sales your digital campaigns drive, think about those brand building metrics: brand lift, brand awareness, and shift away from conversion value to lifetime value, for example. And this leads us on to our next point, brand building versus activation and getting this split right. We spoke about the importance of filling your funnel in the context of on-platform activity, but the really successful brands today are the ones who understand the importance of brand building activity across all their channels and touch points, whether that's social, offline, in-store, you name it. Now, we know that pressure from stakeholders means there's always going to be this kind of focus and drive for immediate sales and to demonstrate immediate ROI, but you still need to make sure you're getting the balance right between your brand building and your brand activation. What is that balance? How do you get that right? Well, Les Binet and Peter Fields found that actually one isn't better than the other. They did a study of over 1,000 campaigns, and what they found was that actually it's getting that split right between long-term brand building and short-term sales activation that really drives growth and healthy brands. So what is that magic number? What is that balance split? They found that actually a 60-40 split in favor of brand building versus sales activations drive the best results. And you also need to look at how you're creating future demand. Brands obviously need new blood to grow. As I mentioned earlier, at any moment in time, 95% of consumers are not in market. That's a huge number. This means any activation or campaigning activity you run is only talking to 5% of buyers who are in market and ready to buy right now. Therefore, if you're focusing solely on driving sales or conversions, that's going to result in a lot of wasted spend and a lot of wasted time. So focusing on brand building and brand awareness activity is going to make sure that you are front of mind for the other 95%. And when the time comes that they find themselves in market, it's going to make conversion easier and it's going to make conversion cheaper. And lastly, the final off-platform tip here is to explore other platforms. If we accept the importance of brand building activity, brands should be looking for cost-efficient and new ways to boost brand awareness. This could include ad-supported streaming services like Hulu in the US, YouTube, and soon Netflix. Things like TikTok, they remain incredibly effective awareness drivers among the right audiences. And then podcast advertising and streaming audio is a huge opportunity for brands at the moment. They've got a huge amount of listeners. And where the most consumption is, this is where you're going to be able to test and learn more effectively as well, especially these channels where measurement and attribution is perhaps a bit easier to obtain than it is on the likes of Meta now. It's all about finding kind of new pockets of efficiency and new opportunities. I'm going to pass back to Liv now, who's going to look at kind of a slightly rosier picture than the landscape she looked at before, and kind of looking ahead at what results look like now and what brands can expect to see.
Awesome, thank you. So it's been a wild few years for brands and consumers. And as we mentioned at the start, the last 18 months have been particularly testing for advertisers who previously relied on their performance campaigns, specifically paid social, to make a consistently strong contribution to their overall results. But we want to finish today by looking at a few reasons to be optimistic and positive, as well as some new campaign benchmarks so that you hopefully leave this session feeling optimistic and excited about the potential for your campaigns. So firstly, it was a really strong end to the year last year for many brands. Overall cost per impressions were 22% cheaper across Meta's platforms in Q4 of last year versus 2021. And this was the second straight quarter to see a drop. So this is really good news for advertisers. Looking at Google, total clicks grew 8% in Q4 versus Q4 in 2021. And in our own experience, the vast majority of our clients saw more revenue, higher ROAS, and cheaper clicks year on year throughout Q4, with many experiencing record levels of sales throughout the holiday period. And this trend wasn't just limited to our clients, though, as this chart shows that in Q4 of 2022, things were really starting to trend upwards. And lastly, despite the ongoing cost of living crisis, as this chart shows, it seems consumers are once again increasing their willingness to spend online. Perhaps the cost of living crisis has driven users back online, where price comparisons are easier and promo codes can be sourced, and therefore making it easier for savvy shoppers to source a bargain. So this is obviously really positive news for your campaigns. And as we said at the start, one thing to remember is that the digital landscape has changed forever. You need to let go and forget about any results that you were seeing pre-iOS 14, especially during the COVID boom. It's important that you know what good looks like now. So we thought that we would share some current benchmarks, starting with click-through rates by industry as of the end of last year, as you can see on the screen, with the average click-through rate across all industries around 0.89%. So if any of your click-through rates currently are looking like this or higher, you're on the right track. And here are some CPA benchmarks as well. Although again, we will reiterate that in this new world, you do need to think more longer term. CPA is obviously really important, but other metrics like lifetime order value and retention are becoming key. So we've taken a look at the new digital landscape, how we got here, and what you can do to mitigate the impact of things like iOS 14 and the regression since the post-COVID bounce. So to finish, we're going to share just a few quick case studies of brands that have seen success by deploying some of the tactics that we've discussed today. Sorry, there's a bit of a lag with these ones. So the first brand we're going to take a look at is Lookfantastic, Europe's #1 online beauty retailer. They approached the economic shifts and political changes that we've seen over the past few years by implementing a combination of objectives for their campaigns, for example, reach and conversions. By combining these full funnel objectives, they saw a 25% lift in incremental revenue, and this approach has now become their new way of campaigning. And as we said earlier, filling your funnel has a knock-on effect for the rest of your campaigns and results, as demonstrated by Pandora. So much like Lookfantastic, they implemented a combination of reach and conversion campaigns to a great effect, which led to a 148% increase in audience reach. And interestingly, they also saw a 4 times increase in the size of their retargeting audiences. And as we know that retargeting is a lot cheaper, they also saw a 73% reduction in cost per conversion. So the importance here, as we've said, is making sure that you're finding the right balance between these objectives. And the final brand that we're going to take a look at is results-driven skincare brand and one of our current clients, Nip and Fab, and their Google campaigns. So we implemented Performance Max last year for them and have seen some really good results since. This approach led to a 27% increase in revenue, a 27% increase in return on ad spend, and a 7.6% increase in average order value. So this just highlights that although it has been a struggle, things are getting better, and we're starting to see a real increase in performance. But now I'll pass back to Ben to go over a few key points that we can take away with us today.
Brilliant, thanks, Liv. So yeah, hopefully those case studies kind of showcase that you're prepared to follow some of the tips and tactics that we've shared. There's still money on the table to be won for brands who do things in the right way in kind of this new digital landscape. So yeah, finishing with some takeaways for you then before we jump into Q&A. The first thing is do what you can to get more data. I mean, we've banged on about it for 45 minutes, but iOS 14 has massively impacted the amount of data you have now. So whether you're expanding your current interest or lookalike audiences, to adjusting objectives to drive on-platform engagements, through to running reach and awareness campaigns, make sure you're doing everything you can to feed the platform as much good data as possible. Secondly, make those platforms work for you. Lean into any automation tools that the platforms have available. As Liv said, it's not just Meta, it's not just Facebook and Instagram. Other platforms have a lot of automation tools available as well. Not only do these save you time, which is great, but post iOS 14, where we're having to second guess measurement, attribution, reporting, allowing the platforms to optimize elements of your campaign can drive significant improvement in results. Next, make sure you've got your split right. So you need to ensure you've got the right balance between brand building and brand awareness activity and sales activations. This doesn't just mean online, but offline across all your other touch points as well. Remember, it's been found that brands and campaigns that yield the best results are those who split their brand awareness and sales activations 60-40. And lastly, adjust your expectations. Thanks to COVID, iOS 14, and a bunch of other factors, the digital landscape has changed. While many saw an initial spike in results post-COVID, brands and campaigns came back down to earth with a bump. And as Liv shared just then, things have started to look a lot more positive as we head into this new year, but it's still important to rethink and reassess what success looks like to you and your brand. Broader KPIs that reflect metrics such as brand lift or recall, customer retention, and lifetime value should all be part of your reporting mix going forwards. So that's the end of the content we had today. Next, we can spend some time just diving into the Q&A. I can see a few have come through here. So we'll open that up and take a look at some of the questions. If anyone else on the session today has a question that they'd like to drop in the Q&A, feel free to do that now. Otherwise, I'm going to open it up and hopefully we have some to go through here. So let's start with one that's come in from Lindsay. You mentioned using things like automations. How good are they really? How do the algorithms work well? So Liv kind of mentioned it earlier that they used to try and kind of thrust all these options on you, and you'd be like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. You just want me to spend more money. It's not going to work. And you kind of ignore them or you test them and switch them off. Post iOS 14, these things are your friend now. They really are. I've mentioned it loads. The more data we can put in, the more the platforms can work with. And the algorithms and the AI is really, really clever and smart now. And it will optimize based on that data. I think they really do work, and I would encourage you to try them all. I think what I'd suggest is that you need to have a bit of patience. Liv said there, the one thing that they do need is time. Typically, I mean, we mentioned Performance Max earlier. We typically see kind of at least 3 weeks before the wheels start to turn and we start to see really good results on Performance Max. For Meta, when we're using things like the Advantage Plus audiences, for example, again, a couple of weeks for you to put enough data in that the platform can get to grips with it and work with. I know that was the beauty of digital. It used to be really rapid and quite quick in the olden days, and it isn't quite that quick anymore because of iOS 14 and stuff we've spoken about. But if you're willing to give it a little bit more time, the results can be really, really effective. Let's have a look at another one here. So anonymous attendee number one has asked about kind of the use of TikTok, and is there evidence that it's beneficial for a B2B business with demographics aged 30 plus for the vast majority, particularly in conversions and revenue perspective? So Liv, I'm going to take this one as well. I'm going to break that down into two parts. The first part of your question, is it beneficial for B2B businesses? Yes. Hopefully some of you guys have seen all the really cool Sage adverts that they run on TikTok. These have been really, really good B2B focused adverts. And so there's definitely a space on TikTok for B2B brands and businesses to play it. What I will say is conversions on TikTok are still hard to come by. I think we've run a number of TikTok campaigns, and the kind of cost per acquisition is still far higher on TikTok than it is on the likes of Meta, Pinterest, and obviously Google as well. So I think the first part of your question, yeah, it's great for a B2B business, but I'd focus it on it. I said it when I was talking about the different platforms, more as an awareness channel at this stage. I know they're working hard to improve their conversion offering and certainly their shop offering, but for now, TikTok, I would suggest having it in your mix as more of the brand driving, brand awareness element. We'll take a couple more. Liv, you can take this one. So you talk a lot about Facebook and Instagram. Does this stuff apply to other platforms as well?
So the short answer is yes, there are a lot of platforms out there that are offering these automation tools and AI tools that we mentioned earlier. So it isn't just limited to Facebook and Instagram. We mentioned LinkedIn, for example, as well. There are a lot of other platforms that are offering these now, so you can kind of branch out with your campaigns. It doesn't need to just be across Facebook and Instagram. And one kind of thing that Ben mentioned earlier was making sure that you are kind of off platform, but looking at other platforms that you can utilize. And the good thing is that you can still find these automations if you're branching out into other platforms as well. So That was a long answer, but the short answer is yes, you can find these on other platforms.
Brilliant, thanks, Liv. We've got a question here from Alex as well. What's the smallest audience you would recommend using for Meta? Thousands, tens of thousands, etc. And you've mentioned it there as well, Alex. It does depend on budget as well, but it depends on your objective and what your goals are. If we think in the context of using digital now as part of your full funnel activity and brand awareness, then there's scope to go a lot broader than you previously might have wanted to. And as I've said, the broader you go, the more data the platforms can work with, and then they'll optimize over time. But I think it really does come down to what your objective is and what you're trying to achieve. There could be, we work with clients, kind of B2B clients, for example, who have a really, they don't have huge volumes of website traffic going through to their website, but they still got a really kind of targeted, segmented retargeting journey with different pools of people at different stages of the purchase journey that we retarget to. And those audiences are only a few thousand, and they still prove really effective. The smaller the audience is, the more important it is to keep an eye on frequency, make sure that's not getting too high, but also making sure your ad creative and ad messaging is refreshed as often as possible. If you've got a small audience, but you've only got a handful of assets, then it's going to get pretty stale pretty quickly. I think we'll take one more question and then we'll wrap things up here. So there was a follow-up to the TikTok question. When you say TikTok is great for B2B, what kind of campaigns do you mean? So again, I think when I think of things like the Sage campaigns that they've run on TikTok, there is always a call to action and a kind of a drive there for some kind of response from users, but ultimately they're on that platform for awareness, and that is still what TikTok does best with the right audiences as well. It's really fantastic for kind of quite significant awareness in a quite short space of time. So I would say typically I would use TikTok for the brand building, brand awareness part of my kind of campaigning mix, less so than kind of driving conversions. I think that's it for questions. As I said, if you do have, you log off and there's something you absolutely wanted to ask, or you're thinking about it and you want to pick our brains on something else, then do please feel free to drop us a message or an email. We'd be happy to pick that up with you guys. That pretty much wraps things up then. We've got the recording of this, which we'll share with you guys over the next couple of days. We've also put all the information we've discussed here into a downloadable guide for you guys as well. So that would be available for you to download. Some nice bedtime reading for you there, I'm sure. And then the only other thing I'll mention is in a couple of months, we've got another event coming up, which will be focused all around Pinterest, which is really going kind of great guns at the moment. And if it's not something that you're currently using, you really should, and keep your eyes peeled for that event. But yeah, that's it from me and from Liv. So thank you everyone for joining, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.